welcome to the channel. This is Scott with Slow Mo Tow. Today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be trying to explain how we're going to take and make our headlight switch on our stock headlight assembly operate a high and low beam function for our auxiliary lights. So for instance, I posted a picture or video the other day on a forum that showed my high beam lights with a white auxiliary and then my low beam lights with a yellow auxiliary, and so that's what I'm going to be going through today. And in order to do that, we're going to have to take and change from a 4-pin relay to a 5-pin relay, and we're going to have to add another wire to our pigtail here. I've got out here on the paper just kind of a breakdown of how the relay is wired and how it looks inside. I'm going to take you out and show you on the bike here in a few minutes. What's just already going to be some connectors that are already wired into a harness, so you're not going to be able to see this in the harness. So what I want to do is break it down to where you could see it and maybe get a little bit of understanding as to what's going on in there. So what you have here is when we go out to the bike, you will have a 12-volt auxiliary port on the bike, and I have added a splitter on that auxiliary port to go to support two functions instead of one. It's just designed to support a 12-volt plug at the instrument cluster, but by adding the splitter, it allows a dual function to where you can power another auxiliary. So we use that for our 12-volt source for our relay. And so what you have here is you're going to have a wire for your positive and a wire for your ground coming out of the plug and feeding into the relay. From there, you're going to have a wire that comes out and supplies power to the high beam. And then you're going to have a wire that will also come out. We will have to add this yellow wire. This yellow wire will be added in pin location 87A, and that will control your low beam lights. This white wire right here, which is also going to be referenced as 86, you see it's got a switch in it. That's the open position on that switch, according to looking at this, is going to supply power to your closed contact, which will be your low beam lights. So when you run this wire to your yellow wire over here, because that supplies power to the yellow light on the actual auxiliary light itself, if the switch is in its normally open position, which will be your low beam setting on your handlebars, then you will have yellow light. When you flip this switch to the high beam function, this is on a Transalp, Transalp 750. When you flip that switch to the high beam function, then it will send fire from pin 87A. It will take fire off of there and it will send it to pin 87, which will initiate fire to your high beam wire. And that right there will give you the white light function to where you can see further down the road in a situation where you don't have oncoming traffic. The yellow beam is really good for whenever you have cars coming at you to where you don't blind them. You still have a little bit of extra light. You can see the parameters of the road better. And it works really good in off-road conditions because the dust doesn't pick up as much in your side of where you're going, because the white light has a tendency to pick up a lot more dust. And from there, as you add this yellow wire, I've got a harness here that does not have the wire in it, and basically what you have is you've got a locking tab here that's connected to, just happens to be a yellow wire. I took one of these apart, and then whenever you do that, you can just slide this up in here and it will lock into place. Once you lock that into place, then your 4-pin harness will become a 5-pin harness, and you can take the 4-pin relay that came with the harness and you can replace it with a 5-pin relay, and that will give you the functionality of the work that we're trying to accomplish here. The harness that we're discussing here today is also going to be the 3D Cycle Parts harness. In order to accomplish what I've done today, we had to buy the fuse for the auxiliary plug to send fire to the auxiliary port at the front of the bike. I will show you that when we get to the bike. Also, you heard me talk about a splitter earlier to split the auxiliary power. I purchased that from 3D Cycle Parts as well, and it allows the functionality of the auxiliary lights through the auxiliary wiring harness that I also purchased from 3D Cycle Parts, and it allows you to have the functionality of the 12-volt power source at the dash as well. Because of the shortage of available stock parts from Honda, I got that from 3D Cycle Parts as well, and it seemed to work just as good as you could expect anything to work. So no concern with using any of their products from my vantage point. Everything that I have purchased from them I've been well pleased with, and most of it would be for either the addition of these lights or in a replacement situation for stock parts. And we'll go out to the bike and we'll pick up from there, and hopefully it'll all make sense when you see. Alright, so one thing that I may have failed to mention here is that whenever I was going over the wiring on the relay going from the 4-pin to the 5-pin, this will be irrelevant if you're going to use a pre-made harness such as the 3D Cycle Parts harness. You won't have to worry about this. The work will already be done for you. But if you were going to build this from scratch and you were going to try to find your switch wire and you were going to try to find your high beam source wire and you were going to try to run your own auxiliary port, get your own plugs and do all that yourself, one thing that I did not mention is that your ground wire coming out of the plug that goes to your relay harness, you're going to have to split off of that ground wire with 2 additional ground wires, one for each of your lights that you're going to be running. Without that, you're not going to have a ground at the light. I guess if you wanted to ground the light somewhere else, that's possible, but I don't think it's practical. If you're going to take the time to build the harness, you may as well go ahead and put the additional 2 wires in there and run them out the harness where you would run your light wires that would eventually connect into your light harness. Hope that clarifies that, but I didn't want to leave that out and then somebody try to do something on their own and have a question as to why it's not doing what it's supposed to do. So hope that helps. The sub harness for the auxiliary port, I told you I'd mention that, and if I don't do it now, I will forget. So once again, we're working on the Transalp. Right here under the seat, you've seen that little dummy plug that was in there on the table a while ago, and you'll have one of those dummy plugs right here on this harness coming out of the bike. And what you want to do is you just want to unplug that, and you have to have this sub harness if you're going to be able to use the auxiliary port up at the front of the bike. It will not work without it. Honda sells them, but as far as I know, they're still out of stock. 3D Cycle Parts has made one. You can go to their website and buy that, no problem. And like I said, everything that I've got from them has worked flawlessly. So that will have to be done in order to accomplish what we're trying to accomplish. Now, the next thing that I do want to point out, I have already went ahead and removed the dash panel, so it will just pop out. You have to unplug the dash panel right here from the TFT. The pigtail will have to be unplugged. Make sure, if you don't have a way of resetting the codes, that you do not turn the switch on until you plug this back in. in order to get the dash off, I'll go ahead and explain that. You've got 2 bolts here, you've got 2 pins here. You just pull those bolts, pull those pins. They're push pins. You'll push them in, and then you'll pull the pin out. And once you do that, then you've got a couple of tabs here that go into rubber grommets. There's 4 rubber grommets. Once you pop those out, unless you have added a 12-volt auxiliary port, the only thing you're going to have is this plug right here in the back for your TFT. And you can just unplug that. Once you unplug it, you can sit it out of the way. And then you can get down to the bare bones of what we're talking about here. Now, I'm going to go ahead and just cut these zip ties. I wasn't going to, for sake of not having to put all this back together, but I think for illustration purposes you'll be glad. So what we have here, this is the relay that we looked at earlier. So here's your relay. It will come wired together in the 3D Cycle Parts harness. You will have to be very careful and cut the grommets, or not grommets, you'll have to be very careful and cut the heat shrink to get down to the wires in the relay harness to add that extra wire. Once you add that extra wire, then you'll be able to run it through the rest of the harness. Pulled the dash out, and I've got some zip ties out of the way to where I can kind of identify some things in here. What we've got here is your auxiliary power source coming out of the bike right here. That plug that I showed you inside where I said that the lights would plug into, this is where the splitter has been put in to where I could put 12 volts of power to my 12-volt auxiliary port that's mounted in my dash over here and still have power to supply my light harness. So from here, where we plug in right here, we go into the harness where the relay was, the 3D Cycle Parts harness that I told you that I purchased. This is the relay that we were discussing. When you get this harness, it will have heat shrink around this whole area right here. If you're going to add that extra wire, you're going to have to cut all this heat shrink. Be very careful not to cut wires, because you are cutting this at your own risk. So you cut this heat shrink here, and whenever you cut this heat shrink, as long as you've got a locking tab and a wire that you can plug in to the empty port there on that pigtail, then you can plug that wire in, and just as I showed you in the prior part of the video, you can replace what comes with it is a four-prong relay. You can replace it with a 5-prong relay, which is what I've done. And then from there, that yellow wire you will have to split. You'll run that split wire down this side and this side of that harness, which are the other 2 legs of the harness that will feed your lights. Okay, something else here that we talked about was you'll have to unplug. It's hard to see in here, but this plug right here and this plug right here are the plugs that are going to plug into your headlight. So you will have to unplug this gray connector right here from this gray connector right here, and you will have a male and female end that is basically a splice that goes from your stock light to your stock harness. And this right here is what allows power for your trigger wire on your headlight switch, so that whenever you hit the high and low function on your headlight switch, it sends the signal to open and close the circuit to switch the power from the white light to the yellow light. From there, you're just wiring down, mounting the lights. Since we're to that point, I bought these barrel style waterproof connectors on Amazon. They've got an O-ring gasket on them that I just popped off of this one. They got an O-ring gasket there, and you just plug them together and you've got a pigtail on either end. So what I did was I wired this end of the pigtail, and this is just a scrap piece right here, but what I did was I wired this end of the pigtail to my lights. I wired this end of the pigtail to my harness that I got from 3D Cycle Parts. You'll have a ground wire, that's your black. You'll have a red wire, that right there, your red wire. If you'll keep it constant from one side to the other, you can use the red wire for your white lights, and then you can use your yellow wire for your yellow lights. And what you will have is the ability to harness a good waterproof connection with all three of your wires running to feed your lights, and then you just tuck them up and zip tie them away. And the next thing that I'll show you once I get all this put back together is the end result, and the end result is the high beam and the low beam function on the motorcycle have an auxiliary light with them. It's just white for high, high vis yellow for low. Alright, so this is your end result right here, or the result we're shooting for. Hopefully it's your end result. Whenever you hit the switch, what used to be just a low beam, little good for nothing light, now you can see in the center there, that little white, that's what remains of your low beam, and then obviously the yellow lights are your auxiliary lights that are filling in, giving a nice wide view. And then from there, if you flip your switch to your high beams, then you've got white light that is accompanied by the high beam. You can see it right there in the center just a little bit. And just for illustration, you cover that. The difference from the right to the left will show you how much coverage you have just with your high beam light versus with the auxiliary light on your high beam and then on your low beam. So it makes quite a bit of difference. As far as accessorizing a bike and must have, if you're going to ride at night at all, number one, you want to be able to see. And then if you're going to ride during the day in heavily trafficked areas, you want to be seen. I have been hit on my bike before, not on the Transalp, but I was actually hit on a KTM 390 Adventure because a lady did not see me and pulled right out into the side of my bike. So visibility is a big deal to me, and that's part of the reason why I went down the road that I went, because I want to make sure that I'm doing everything I can to be seen by people that may not see you otherwise. So high beam, you've got a white auxiliary that will shine plenty bright enough, and then low beam, like I said, you've got your high vis yellow auxiliary light, and it also is a very nice addition if you do any kind of off-road riding in the dark, because all the granules from the dust that fly up that normally would kind of blind you in some instances with a white auxiliary light, you don't pick all that up with the yellow. Alright, one more thing that I want to mention, because I have mentioned over and over and over again that all of the stuff that I purchased for this upgrade came from 3D Cycle Parts. That's true all the way up to the point where you come to the lights. The lights and the light brackets. I got the light brackets on Amazon because I wanted to mount my lights to my crash bars. 3D Cycle Parts offers a nice setup, but it mounts to the forks and it drops down, and I just wanted to be able to integrate them into my crash bars. The other thing is there's not a whole lot of people out there that make a dual function light. So you could buy two sets of lights and have a high beam white light and a low beam yellow light and wire it all in, or you could buy one light that does both. And most of those lights are rather pricey, but I found I guess a budget light, if that's what you want to call it. The brand is Co-Light. They sell 2 or 3 different options whenever it comes to a dual beam light, which meaning you've got a white light and a high vis yellow. But if you'll go to their site, check them out. This is the second set of these lights that I've bought. I bought a set for my KTM before I sold it, and I did have one of the low beam lights go out. They have, I think, a 2-year warranty, and they warranted it with very little issue. I had to send them a video showing that it didn't work, and it took a couple weeks, but I got my light and was able to replace it. So I'm satisfied with the performance of the lights for what I'm going to do. And so far, the customer service, even though it's not an American company, it's a foreign company, so there is a little bit of a delay. I've been pleased with their customer service, and they have honored their warranty to me. So just to throw that out there, if you're wanting a dual function light, that is one avenue you could pursue. And I'm sure there's others. That's just the setup I went with. It's not the only one. It may not be the best one, but it's the one that works for me. And as far as the lights are concerned, I guess that's it. We may do a how-to video on something else in the future. I've got some tires that we're going to have to mount at some point. We've got a Rabaconda tire changer, and we've got a Motage Tractionator Adventure, I believe it is. No, it's a Rousey. And then we've also got the Tusk 2 tracks that as soon as these tires wear out are going on this bike. And just from what I hear, they're one of the hardest tires to mount. So it may be entertaining, but I got to put a few more miles on these first. So I hope that the video was helpful to somebody. That's my goal in this, is to show you what I've done, and maybe it will give you an idea, encourage you to do something you wouldn't do otherwise, or maybe just inform you of how to go about doing what you already wanted to do in the first place. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.